Well, welcome back to the Munn Avenue Muse podcast and videocast presented by munnavenuepress.com. We are a publisher and marketer of books for authors around the world now. And I'm so delighted today to have a guest who I think wrote a very special book, a really different book that he's going to talk about. His name is Don Gabor, and I'll read you a very brief bio, and then we'll learn more about Don's book, Vienna on Fire. Don is the author of How to Start a Conversation and Make Friends and 7 other books and audio programs on communication skills that have sold nearly 1 million copies worldwide. Don has presented communication workshops to corporations and small businesses, associations, and colleges since 1981. He was a member of the National Speakers Association for 20 years and was the 2010 and 11 president of the New York City chapter. He lives in Brooklyn with his wife, Eileen, and their cat, Ruby. So, Don, welcome.
Well, thank you, Charlie. I'm thrilled to be on your show.
Yeah, and your book was just recently published, or we helped publish it with you. Give us, before we get into the book, which we're going to talk a lot about, I would just like to know a little more about your background as a conversation expert. What is that? What is this special skill you have?
You know, it's funny. This is something I used to get in trouble for when I was a kid. In 9th grade, Mr. Eisenberger, the strict English teacher, was asking some questions, and I was gabbing to one of my, schoolmates, and, Mr. Gabor, what's the answer to that question? And I don't know how, and I don't remember the question, but I answered it. And he said to me, Mr. Gabor, you're the only person I've ever met who can talk and listen at the same time. Now get out and go stand in the hall. And I took that as some career advice. And I make a joke out of it, but in a way, he kind of put his finger on it. And when I moved to New York in 1979, I had some teaching, quite a bit of teaching background, and teaching guitar and in elementary school, students of various ages and disciplines. But when I got to New York, I started working for an adult education program, and they asked me to teach a class that they had put together called How to Start a Conversation. And this was in 1980. I can't believe it's been that long that I've been writing and speaking on this subject, but that's when it started. And it was really, that was the dawn of this 40-plus year career. And this was something that I learned, that a lot of people felt they didn't feel comfortable doing this. They didn't feel comfortable walking into a room full of people. They didn't feel comfortable just breaking the ice and starting a conversation and all the other things that go on. And when people meet one another for the first time. And so to kind of summarize the whole idea of what makes a conversation expert, what I did was, and this was sort of my nature and how I do things, I guess, is I read a lot of background information before I taught the class, because I can walk into a group of people and start conversations. But I thought, well, what are some of the issues that people have, and what's been written about it? And of course, Dale Carnegie is the great grandfather of this self-help movement. And at that time, he had written a book, how to talk, how to meet people and influence people. And it's a great book, but it was written in a style that really I saw left something out. And what I added to that genre was taking the skills and breaking them down into very thin, small units, sort of like if you went to a place and they were slicing something very, very thin, and I presented those pieces, body language, asking questions that evoke a more detailed response, or fishing questions for topics, how to balance the conversation, all these kind of skill sets that a lot of people took for granted, either good conversationalists or poor conversationalists, or anywhere in between, and really think about it on a skill set level. My view is all speaking is public speaking, whether you're speaking to one person or a room full of people, and these skills overlap. And so for the next 10 years, I taught these workshops with 10, 20, 30, 40 people in it, first for 3 hours, then it turned into 4 2-hour sessions over a month period, once a week. And then in 1991, I joined the National Speakers Association as a professional speaker and started presenting the workshops in a more corporate market for networking and building your business and just building social and professional networks. And it's just continued. I've written several books over these 40 years on that topic, and it's been great. It's been a great ride. It's fun. I tell people there's nothing that's more fun to me than meeting somebody and finding out where they're at and what they like to do. So that's how I became an expert, is by just learning and doing, and then professionally integrating those skills into a business. And this is the tricky part in any kind of writing or speaking endeavor, is that integration.
Sure. And I want to talk more about your book, but I do have a question about conversational style. I'm very interested in this topic too, and I've done a lot of public speaking and teaching, so I relate to it. But isn't it the case that, like, we form these habits of interaction as we grow up or in school, and there's a pattern,
Yep, absolutely.
and some patterns are good and other patterns are not good. So I suppose what you're doing is enlightening people about maybe bad patterns and how to improve them, or how do you get out of a habit? How do you change a habit?
Well, there's been lots of books written about how to do that. And, I think, to get back to your style issue, this is what I tell people, because I have a style of speaking and you have a style of speaking. And the secret to connecting with people, this is my view, and I'm not a therapist or psychologist, I'm just this guy who has helped a lot of people overcome what has been for many a lifelong, struggle. It's like a dance. And if you want to dance with other people, you have to be flexible and be able to adapt your style to the other person's style. Now, and you also have to have an idea of what your style is, and its pros and cons, its strengths and weaknesses, and some of the other styles of people with whom you will be speaking. So the idea is, when I meet somebody, it doesn't take me too long to figure out, are they introverted or extroverted? Those are the big two, right? And most people say, well, if they're shy, they're introverted. If they're outgoing, they're extroverted. Well, extroverted people can start conversations. The problem is they don't like to end them, and they like to also talk too much. And maybe I have fallen into that category. The introverted style tends to be more retentive and hanging back. They're not initiating. But if somebody shows an interest in what they do, or what he or she is involved in, they are willing to open up. So this is where the adaptation comes in. And you talk about the strengths and weaknesses, or good habits and bad habits. The number one habit that everybody needs to improve, and myself, I was told one day it was an area I needed to improve, is listening. And this is really the key to any conversation, is to listen and then connect in some way, and find some kind of commonality. Sometimes it takes a little while. Sometimes it happens right away. You've met people who think, I just clicked with that person. And then sometimes you think, I didn't know what to say to the person. I just don't know what to say. And so this is part of understanding your own style, the strengths and weaknesses, and some of the styles of others. And there's really only 4 basic styles, and I don't want to go in and elucidate on all of them, but that's really the way to get over some of these humps.
Well, it's such an interesting topic. I could spend the whole time talking about it too.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah. And then there's the whole topic of like active listening, not just sitting there, but
that's right.
prompting people and asking leading questions. And
Hmm.
it's interesting that um, I like you try to be a good active listener, and people who don't talk much but listen effectively, the other people say, "Oh, they're so smart,"
Yeah. Let me. Yeah.
because they keep their mouths shut and they listen and seem interested in what I have to say. So,
Well, you see, this is where the shy person will say, I'm a good listener, but I don't really like to, put out too much. And there's the pitfall, because one of the tricks, and I won't go into all the details, but of making small talk, which introverted people, shy people tend to, they hate that. But what they're missing is that when you're talking with somebody, particularly somebody that you don't know or you just met, they're looking for clues from the person with whom they're speaking, what he or she wants to talk about. It's not just what I want to talk about. I want to know what you want to talk about. So this balance of talking and listening, revealing a little bit of information, not just asking questions and showing interest, but revealing in a balanced way, exchanging information. It's very important. It shows you're open. It shows that you're willing to communicate, and it shows that you want to participate. And this is something where I've been, you know, on my soapbox for a long time about this, because it works and it helps people,
yeah,
and it kind of can mitigate a lot of the habits that have held people back.
sure, sure, it makes perfect sense. So you built a career. You've written a number of nonfiction books on this topic.
Yes.
What happened? What inspired you to write Vienna on Fire, a book of historical fiction based on your mother's experiences in world during World War II? Tell us about the inspiration, the beginning, and where that led you.
That's a question that I have thought a lot about, and I've come to a couple different conclusions where those points kind of filtered into my mind and then arrived at a book. And I didn't wake up in the morning and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to write a novel. It didn't happen that way. I grew up in Long Beach, California. I had an older sister, and my parents, nice, middle class upbringing and all this. I knew my mother was from Austria. And when I was a kid, she told me stories about her life in Austria, in Vienna, where she was born, with her parents who owned a store. They were fairly well off and had a nice life. There were 200,000 Jews living in Vienna at that time. Her family was, as I understood it, did not have a religious bent, except that she told me that she went to school at a Catholic school, and they celebrated Christmas.
Mm.
And so and then I asked her one day, and this is when I was maybe, 10, 11 years old, maybe a little bit younger. I said, well, what happened to your parents? Because I knew she came here when she was 19 without her family. And I really didn't know much more than that, because she never talked about it. And she said, well, and she was kind of a little bit, and I remember this, she was just hesitant. She said, well, there was a lot of Vienna was bombed during the war, and I guess they died. So I thought, well, gosh, that's horrible. I'm so, I didn't know what to say. And that was kind of the end of the conversation. Well, fast forward to 1997, 98. And we'd heard stories about her, rowing on the Danube with her friends, and going with her father to Rome, and getting, having to kiss the Pope's ring, and, him doing all this kind of these stories, and we'd hear them over and over again. So my wife and I are standing out in front of at the address where she lived, which she did not want to give us, by the way.
In Vienna.
She goes, it's not there anymore, and it's too far. My father let the cat out of the bag.
In Vienna, you're talking
In Vienna.
about.
We're standing in Vienna
Right.
in 1997 on our first trip there. And we're standing in front of this at the address, and I'm expecting to see, I don't know, a new building or new buildings or something. And I'm seeing a building that says, it's an old building, a turn of the century building, and all the buildings on the block, and this isn't a nice neighborhood. All the buildings on the block are 100 years old. And there's a sign on the building that says architect is man's name and 1913. And I'm going, but wait a minute. Something wasn't right. And it was at that moment I thought, okay, something isn't making sense here. And of course, what I learned so that was the moment the penny dropped, that everything that my mother was telling me wasn't the whole story. Or not everything, but that particular piece wasn't the whole story. And then, of course, there was more to the whole story that I learned. And so it was at that point to where I started doing some research. And my wife, Eileen, who has been just a huge assistant help with this project, not only as a researcher, but as an editor, we gathered all these materials. And I saw a lot, and this is where I learned one of the biggest pieces of information that she had never, ever revealed to me or my sister.
Which was what?
Which was that her family was Jewish. Never knew. Not a word, nothing about Jewish culture, nothing about anything Jewish at all.
And you found this in the document research in Vienna, right?
We found this in the document research that we requested from the Austrian government when they finally, after 40 years of, stonewalling, released documents from the German-occupied time. And on those documents, and this is chilling to me, and it was among other things that were rather dissettling, where it had her parents' names. And on these documents, they were all in German, by the way, so we couldn't read them. So my wife decided she was going to learn to speak German. So that was the next step, and which she has continued to do. But their names were Otto Judenblau. They would put Juden, Jewish, or Jew, and her mother's name, Lily Sarah Blau. And that was the first, well, wait a second. And then, of course, there were other indications, and we got a stack of documents. I mean, and I'm holding my fingers up, and I could point to into my office how thick these documents were. But that was the other big surprise. And I could go on, and I will, through the interview as you ask me, but this is really what started to motivate me to write something. But the problem was, to get to your question about how it came to a novel, I'm not a historian, and I sort of would nibble around the edges in terms of asking questions to my mother about certain topics, and she would, there would be a few little tidbits of information, and then boom. And when I said, wow, it'd be kind of interesting to do a family tree, absolutely not. The hand would slam down on the table, absolutely not. And so it took me a while. And so no memoir, no historical, no history book, a biography. That wasn't my thing. So after she died in 2017, and I had been ruminating about all this for all these years, I decided that the best way to approach this topic, because I like to write, and yes, I had written, all these nonfiction books, but I thought the best way to approach this, based on what I was learning, and this was the other thing that motivated me, I was learning about what happened in that part of the world at that time that I really didn't know much about. I never learned about it in school, and I'd read.
So you did research.
I
You
did.
did.
We did a lot of research, and it was at that time where I decided, okay, a historical novel will be the way to go, and that's how Vienna on Fire. That's kind of the leapfrog over a lot of different points in the process. That's how the novel. That's how I came to begin the novel.
Yeah, and so you had. It's just very interesting because you had real stories from your mother that do appear in the novel, but because she was reluctant to fill in the blanks,
Yeah.
you created a fictional narrative, but peppered in it and through it are your real stories of your mother. Is that correct?
That is correct. And the big missing piece of her story was the novel takes place. It starts on the day that the German army came into Austria. It's called the Anschluss, and that was the annexation of Austria, incorporated it into the country of Germany. And it starts then, and it ends in 1939. In May of 1939. The first half of the book is what happened while her time living still in Vienna with her family, and her time in the resistance, and just the things that went on there. And we have stories for that. We have documents, what happened to her parents' business, and that kind of thing. But the big piece that was missing, and I asked her about this, forget it, is how she got from Vienna to a boat in the Netherlands to take to New York, which she did in May.
And with presumably many obstacles along the way.
Well, at that time, Jews could not get a passport.
Across borders, yeah.
Across borders. They couldn't get visas. They had to, there were so many obstacles that they had to face, which we learned. Again, these are things I didn't really know about, but I learned. And so I had to, what I decided to do, and as I was reading obituaries and memoirs and just general books about the people that were in the Nazi Party and people in the resistance, I found other stories. And so what I decided to do is I wanted to create a time frame of her going from Vienna to the ship in the Netherlands. And when I asked her, I said, well, how did you get from Vienna to, where you got the ship? Oh, I don't know. It was so long ago. I guess I took a train. And I'm thinking, well, if you took a train, I don't think so, because again, from what I learned, that just was not likely. So what I did was I took stories from these various sources and I
stitched it together.
I think the biggest part, and I was thinking, well, where's my mother's role in all this? Really, it's fiction, and this is my way of it. This is not a memoir. It's not a biography. It's not my mother's full story of her, what she did. But it's the character's personality is pretty tightly tied into my mother's personality. That I can safely say. And I feel that it also tells a story about other people and the obstacles that they faced and what they did, and also what the people who helped them. She had help, and there was a lot of help to people who survived, and I wanted to make that clear too. And a lot of the help came from Austrians. A lot of help came from Germans. A lot of the help came from people who had a lot to lose, and so that was all kind of factoring into the whole mix.
Yeah, and I think what you've done is that synthesis of real story, historical research, and some imagination is creates an authentic experience for a reader. I mean, I've written 6 books of fiction myself, and the true thread through the books is things that are happening right now in technology that most people don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the
Interesting.
characters are what people really relate to and the emotional impact of their experiences. But they're having that thread of true experience woven into the story. I think as a reader, you can sense that even though this is historical fiction, there's so much that's real about it, or real portraits of the time. Is there a passage or two you might be willing to share with us to read for us? I'd love to hear it.
Okay. I was thinking about what would work in our format here, and I know I was going to read 3 or 4 chapters, but I thought, nah, that might be a little bit too much. So I'll take about a minute or so and read from a chapter that's in the second part of the book. It takes place on February 20th, 1939. The chapter is called Free Austria. And it takes place at the Danube Canal. And Greta, who's the main character, is with her 2 friends from the resistance, Theo and Werner. And they're on a midnight mission to defy the Nazis. They're just about ready to descend towards the canal, and they're carrying buckets of paint and paintbrushes. Greta held her breath while she, Werner, and Theo crept down the rusted and icy staircase to the cement channel that ran through the oldest part of Vienna. Greta peered into the moonlight and the shadows that covered the canal. She and her friends were fighting back against the Nazis. She felt important and strong. For the next half hour, Greta, Theo, and Werner painted their anti-Nazi messages in tall white letters on the canal wall. Support the resistance. Stop the Nazis. Free Austria. A splash from the canal disturbed the crisp and quiet Vienna night. Startled, Greta twisted her head around. What was that? A column of blazing light from the deck of a small German patrol boat floating down the canal spilled onto the walkway, illuminating everything and everyone in its path. Halt! The ear-splitting order from the loudspeaker sliced through the serene nightscape. Don't move or we'll shoot. You're all under arrest.
So now we want to know what happens next, but you'll have to read Vienna on Fire,
Yeah.
a World War II survival story to find out. And I will mention here that Vienna on Fire is available on Amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com. Your local bookstores can order copies as well, and hopefully soon it will be in libraries too. I said to you, Don, in the beginning, and I don't say this to all the authors we work with. I think this is a very special book because it puts you in the moment, in World War II, in Vienna, in the struggle. And certainly, we grew up on World War II stories and to a lesser extent, the stories of the Jews and the Catholics and the people that were in concentration camps. But I think your story transcends and kind of crisscrosses all the narratives we grew up with, but in a very real and different way. Kudos to you for doing it. And
Thank
clearly,
you,
this
Charlie.
was a personal passion project for you. Talk about the emotional side of this for you, and what you went through in the process of writing it. How did that feel?
You see, I take a deep breath because I had to do that quite often. The hardest thing, I think, for me in this project was separating myself as a writer and doing all the things that you had just described, being, trying to create a narrative that a reader could feel was authentic and could maybe identify in certain ways, maybe not necessarily that they lived through the same thing, but maybe somebody in their family, or just having to overcome adversity in some way. Being able to separate myself to do that from what was really happening to not just the Jews and some of the Catholics and a lot of other people that were suffering at that time, but what actually happened to my mother's family. And this was really a dark place, I have to tell you. And when I would be doing some of the research, I'm thinking, oh, geez, I cannot, just fathom how horrible, how absolutely horrible it must have been for her parents to begin with, who they were Jews, they were non-religious Jews. So they didn't, as far as I know, and then that might be another piece that I don't know about. There's a lot of pieces I don't really know about. But just having somebody come in and start to take over their whole life, their whole business. And that's what happened. And it was incremental. It didn't just happen like that. Every day there was another law. They couldn't buy meat. They couldn't sell things. There were doctors that they couldn't practice. And so it was not just them, it was a huge, it was 10% of the population of the country. And that's how many Jews were living, approximately how many Jews were living in Vienna and in the country as a whole. Most of them did live in Vienna. So that emotional minefield, I kind of had to I wanted to avoid. And it also, the other minefield that I really chose to avoid was how to deal with I was working on this while my mother was still alive. I hadn't figured out what I was going to do with the book, and so we would ask questions. And I found out, my wife and I found out how her parents had died. And it wasn't in a bombing raid. That we found out. They were deported in 1941, which was 2 years after my mother left. So there's another question, how they lasted from 1939 to 1941. Don't know, but I have my guesses. But we did find out what happened to them. It was not a very pretty picture, and I don't have to paint it, but I can leave it to your imagination. I decided that I didn't ask my mother if she knew how they died, because she already told me they were killed in a bombing raid. So I already got her version of the story, which I knew wasn't true. And I decided I was not going to pick at this injury that she experienced. She came here when she was 19 years old, left her family behind,
because
didn't know anybody.
She didn't want to relive it.
She didn't want to relive it, and I knew what happened, and I didn't want her waking up in the middle of the night, replaying all these memories of whatever feelings were associated with them. And I know they weren't particularly, pleasant. And so that was another emotional ride. But I just made this decision. No. Some people would say, "Oh, come on, push her, get her to get her." It wasn't my style. Yeah. So there was that. And after a while, I felt the distance between me as the writer and me as the grandson of this man who was arrested by the Gestapo. And I have photographs of his arrest warrant, with this way and this way and this way. And the ironic thing is, I look a great deal like him. Yeah. So it's a little. So anyway, that's part of the emotional ride that I went through.
We all, I think to some extent, there's a reason why Ancestry.com is a very popular website, is because we all we all have a desire to understand our roots, but in the case of being Jewish, which I am, and I lost 105 ancestors in Germany and Poland during the war. At least
Uh,
that's what I've been told.
yeah.
There is no family tree that goes that deep because just of that situation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's, I think, even more of a burning desire to understand what that must have been like.
Yeah.
We had a really interesting kind of collaborative experience together when it came to designing the cover of the book. And I'd like to give you my view of that, and I'd love to hear your view. But um, you had mocked up an idea, but when we started working together. But I think that the key thing was there's this amazing picture on the cover of your mother ice skating, and with a man next to her who later turns out to be a Nazi, or we think he was. Um, and when you presented that cover idea to us, I thought it lacked the menace that was really portrayed so beautifully in the first chapter of your book, where she is, in fact, ice skating and the Nazis roll in and they unfurl these flags in the ice skating, the Nazi flags in the ice skating arena. So I suggested, and we put a backdrop of these Nazi banners. So you have this interesting tension in the cover between a happy young woman skating with a man and the impending catastrophe that was the Nazi regime in the background. I mean, can you have any comment on the cover?
Brilliant. That's my comment. No, it was once you said that to me, I said, you're absolutely right. It could be a romance, a historical romance. It wasn't, as far as I know. Now that photograph, there's something about my mother, maybe it's the Austrian mentality, that sort of shut the past off. And, she told me things like that. But we found this box of photos, and that was one of the photos in the box that had been stuffed away in some closet somewhere. And that photo is of her ice skating in front of the Vienna town hall. She's 18 years old, and that's the place and about the time that the book starts and where it takes place. And I saw that photograph and I thought, my gosh, it's just a perfect photograph. And when you said it needs menace, I thought, yes, that's exactly right. And so your instinct was, I think, spot on. And I've gotten so many positive comments about the cover. And I look at it right now and I'm thinking, it just says it all. Now, the guy that's in that photograph, we don't really know who that is. But she told me, again, this story that I'd heard many times, that after the Nazis came into Vienna, she was walking down the street and she saw this guy who was chasing after her at one point, some fellow. She's a nice looking young woman. She had guys that were chasing after her. She had some friends. And she got really scared because she had been out to lunch or dinner with this guy. And my mother was very outspoken about her views. And she said, I'm supporting the socialists and I do this and do that. And she saw this guy across the street and he was in a Nazi brown shirt uniform. And she just, it was one of those moments, if you know what I mean. And so that's where that idea came from, where he became the ex-suitor who was chasing after her and was relentless. And his name in the book is Hans Jaeger, and Jaeger in German means hunter. And so this is how, again, this is my imagination at work. And but that story was based around this photograph and that and the story of her seeing this fellow in the Nazi uniform.
And it's a very intense, compelling opening scene. I think that just sucks you right into the story.
Yep.
Yeah. And so tell me, Don, how's that? You've written the book now. You've kind of fulfilled a dream, which is one of the reasons I love what we do at Mount Avenue Press. As Lily said, and you worked with her 6 months or so ago, yeah, we help authors fulfill their dreams. And so it's a great satisfaction and pleasure for me to help you with that process. Tell me how it's changed you.
Well, before I answer your question, I want to say that writing a book is just part of the journey. And it's a big part, and there's a lot to it, and people ask me for advice, and I'm perfectly happy to share my experience and views on that. But my big message to people is you don't usually write and publish alone. And Charlie, you and Avenue Press and your team at Avenue Press have really played a major role and significant part of helping me get this book into print. And I can only say that I've worked with a lot of people in publishing. I've been published by major publishers, and not taking anything away from them because they have their role to play. I have nothing but good things to say about all the help that you've given me from the manuscript all the way through all the steps. And there's a lot of steps that go from a quote unquote finished manuscript, which is often not really finished, but the author thinks it is, to getting it up on Amazon. So I have a lot to thank you for. And I also have, as I mentioned before, my wife with her research and editorial skills. And there's a couple of other people that are helping me too. Author Steve Bannon at Author Bites is another person who and his associates there are helping me get the word out. So there's a lot involved in publishing a product, and some of the people who gave me feedback along the way, the copy editors and other editors. So how has it changed? This book changed my life. It's changed my thinking and view of how people have a capacity to overcome adversity. We take so much for granted. I can't even begin to myself included. And I won't go into some of my other life experiences that have changed that a little bit for me. But this book has really made me think about the spirit of humanity a little differently. And it also has made me think about what we take for granted here in the United States of our rights and our freedoms to express ourselves, to write what we want, hopefully to read what we want, although that's under attack, and to reach out to help people who need it, and that's what happened in this book for me. And it, being a writer and being somebody who works alone a lot, you kind of get into an insulated world, and it's very easy to just sort of tune everything out. But that being said, writing the book has kind of helped me see that view of reaching out to help people a little bit more. And I think that's, for me, that's been a good thing.
No, well, I don't think you could ask for more, really. Well, Don, this has been so wonderful. I really appreciate your taking the time to share your stories with us. I hope the listeners out there will go to Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com and have a look for Vienna on Fire by Don Gabor. It is both enlightening, compelling, entertaining, a must read in my book. And if you have a book in you or thinking about a book and would like to know more about publishing with Munn Avenue Press, check out Munn, MUNN, avenuepress.com. We publish books the way Don described. We do covers, interiors, editing, proofing, ISBN numbers, Amazon descriptions, everything you need to publish your book, as well as market the book afterwards. We figured out some ways to actually sell books, which is equally hard. And we produce podcasts just like this, so and audiobooks. So if you have an interest in any of those, please reach out. And thank you again, Don, for being here.
Charlie, it's been an entire pleasure, and I can't be happier with the result.